Hi, I'm Margaret, and welcome to Knit Pickers PEI. This little orange tail belongs to my little Klingon cat, Soleil. She's my companion today. Now, what today's little quick tutorial is going to involve is how to join balls of yarn. So, say you're knitting a project, and it's definitely going to need more than one skein of yarn. I'm going to show you two different ways to do it. Now, if you are knitting, say, a sweater, but it's a seamed sweater, it's not as critical to have to join your yarns together. You can always start a new ball of yarn at the beginning of a row and knit across and tuck your ends into the seam. But if you're knitting in the round, maybe you're making socks, maybe you are making a sweater knit in the round and you want to join two balls of yarn together, a couple of tricks to show you. So, shall we get started? So let's take a look at three different ways to join a brand new ball of wool in a knitting project. First of all, if you're knitting a sweater or a project that has seams like this one will, easiest and simple way to add a new ball of yarn is to start the ball of yarn at the beginning of your row. That way the ends of the earlier ball of wool and your new ball of wool can be tucked right into the seam, no problem. But what if you are knitting something in the round, or maybe you're even knitting a seamed piece, but you're working a set of short rows, like I did for this sweater here, for neck shaping. And then you run out of wool while you're doing your short rows. Well, you can't exactly then tuck the ends into your seam. So there's two different ways that we can take care of that problem. First of all, I'll just take my ball. I just finished winding up a new ball of wool on my Nosta pin. So I'll pop this new ball of wool off. And here's the tail of the new ball. And here's the tail of wool from the old ball. Now this particular method I'm going to show you works really well if you want to join in the middle of a row, and particularly if you are using an acrylic or a superwash wool. This is a no knot method, so you're not going to be tying any knots in it, but it's a very secure method and it's not going to slip on you. So what you do is you take your old wool, the old tail, and you double it up, okay? And then on the next stitch that you're going to do, you're going to take that doubled up yarn and you're going to knit with it, but you're going to leave this loop here. Okay, so I'm going to be knitting this particular stitch with two strands of wool. Now what you might want to do is place a stitch marker so that when you're coming back and knitting this round again, you know that these two strands aren't two stitches. These two strands on the next round will be knit as a single stitch. So you don't want to make that mistake, otherwise you're going to be increasing your row by at least one stitch, possibly two. So here we've just knit this stitch using two strands and we created a loop. So now we take the tail of the new ball of wool and we slip it into that loop and create another fold over. So you see what I've done there? And I'm going to snug the first one up. So what that does is it's going to create a nice tight knot, And the beauty of it is that it is exactly where you want it to be. Let me just snug that right up. So let's just say even you were changing a color. You could start your brand new color right here. So now these are 2 strands of your next new ball of wool. And you knit the next stitch with those 2 strands. Now this is where I would put a stitch marker so that I know when I'm coming back that these 2 stitches, these 2 double-stranded stitches, will be knit in the future as one single stitch. And of course, what you're going to do at the end of your project, when you have finished your knitting and your weaving in your ends, these 2 ends just get woven right in, but this is nice and secure. There is no way that that's coming undone, but there's no knot, nothing to bother you, nothing to rub against you. It is a perfectly smooth join. It might add just the tiniest bit of bulk on those 2 stitches, but once the project is washed and blocked, it's completely invisible. Now the next way to join wool, join an old ball of wool to a new ball of wool, and this only works with wool, and particularly wool that is untreated. In other words, it's not a superwash wool. A superwash wool will not felt. And what you want to be able to do is to felt these 2 ends together. And this is known as spit splicing. Yep, you heard that right. It's called spit splicing. Now, I have not been able to bring myself to spit on my wool, although I've heard that apparently some enzyme or whatever in your saliva does help the felting process to go a little more quickly. But I just use regular old water. So the first thing you want to do is to separate the strands. So here we go. Just open this one up. I've got 2 strands here and 2 strands here. So what I want to do is I lay in my hand 1 strand from the new ball and 1 strand from the old ball. I'm just kind of going to line those up in the palm of my hand. And then I have a little dish of water here. And I find for me the easiest way to do it is I have a little dish of water and I have a straw. I just dip that in and I plug the top of the straw with my finger. That lifts a tiny little bit of water up and I drop that into the palm of my hand. I want to get the 2 tails of wool nice and wet. Now, as I said, if you want to, you can spit on this. I choose not to. I just use water. Now, I'm going to felt these 2 together, so I'm just going to rub these 2 together. And then right at the end, right where the original ball of wool is, I'm going to make sure that that is definitely doubled up. So I might carry over a little bit and just rub that in. And you see here, it only looks like there's a little bit there, so I'm going to carry this little tail up a little bit too, and I'm just going to felt these pieces together. You can even really give it a good rub. And what I have done is I have effectively felted the two tails together, and now I can continue working. You can even use this technique if you are winding up a ball of wool, and every now and again you might find a knot in your skein. So you don't need to worry too much about that. You can cut out the knot, spit splice your two tails together, and just carry on. So this one, it only works with 100% wool and not a superwash wool, but an untreated natural fiber. So just to recap then, 3 different ways to join your wool. Number 1 is to join a new ball of wool at the beginning of your row if you're working with a seamed project. Technique number 2 is to create the loops where you're joining them together, tugging it, and knitting 2 double strand stitches, one with the old ball, one with the new ball, and weaving your ends in. Or the spit splice method, which actually is my overall go-to method. What I really like about this as well is that there's no ends to weave in. So you just are knitting away and no tails to tuck in whatsoever. But it's a nice, secure, sturdy join. So I hope these techniques will help you out, and happy knitting!